Questionable Ethics, Chapter 3, Futile Resistance. Air passed through my lips as my lungs filled with air. My eyes stayed closed as I concentrated on the sounds I made. My hands lay rested upon my knees. My rifle lay flat in my lap, and my behind sat flush with the dirt of the savanna forest. The world around me continued to turn as I sat here silently, contemplating all that had just happened to me. Opening my eyes, I looked down, searching the ground for my thoughts as I lamented on my situation. I focused on the sand and grass of the soil. I watched it as it was caressed by the wind, the same wind that I could feel pushing me north. But I wasn't moving, not right now at least. I still needed time to collect my thoughts, and my oh my, the thoughts I had running around in my mind would have made a more reserved man call me a lunatic, a threat to civilized society, even as I was now questioning everything I held dear. But above the senselessness questioning and the conspiracies that were being rooted, the most prolific thoughts that were circling around me were worries about my mental instability. I mean, what was that voice? Was it just me? Was it my brain having a meta-crisis, or did I really spend too much time in that void with nobody to talk to? I wasn't sure, but the one thing I was sure of, I couldn't focus on that right now. Other pressing matters were at hand, like the fact that I still don't know where I was or why I was here to begin with. Well, things could have always been worse. I could be dead. I could be. Actually, that's pretty much it, I said to myself as I fell backwards onto my rucksack, my gears shifting on my body as I did. Things could definitely have been worse for me, but at the time, I saw no other alternative than being dead. This was a situation I had really never prepared myself for. Maybe I wish I were dead at the time. At least then I would have gotten some closer, or maybe I was dead and this was the afterlife. But if this was being dead was like, then being dead sucked. No, I wasn't dead. I took yet another deep breath as I covered my mask lenses with my hands, shrouding myself in a darkness for a second, as I came to terms with the fact that this place was some form of cosmic punishment for what I was part of, or for what I have done in the past. This was actually quite easy to come to terms with at the moment. After all, fair is fair, I guess, as the two alternatives for punishment would have been way more painful, way too brief. I nodded once before I pulled myself back into my sitting posture as I removed my hands from my face. God, I was so glad I was alone at the moment. Nobody needed to see a grown man go through something like this, let alone that grown man be me. In fact, if that was ever to come across other people again, nobody should ever know what happened here, no matter what, mainly because I now had a newfound respect for meditation. It was a bit out of character for a diehard devil dog to meditate, but I found peace through it, and that was something that I needed more than anything. But even so, I was thankful for this situation that I was given, especially if said situation allowed me to meditate in complete silence, allowing me to think and reorganize my thoughts in a proper order of attack. This solitude, however, I no longer needed after coming around to understanding my new predicament. I pushed myself up off the ground with my hands into a kneeling position as I grabbed my rifle, my head, which barely made it above the tall grass that hid this place from view, scanned the area around me for hostile life or movement. After all, I was right, this place was unknown to me, and I couldn't be too careful. But seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I stood back up properly. Then I quickly returned to the path I had taken. Here I resumed my walk north after I looked back over my shoulder at the land I covered. Heading back the way I came crossed my mind, but As the wind blew against me, I turned back to north and kept walking. I didn't understand why, but for some reason, the wind just seemed trustworthy. It filled the dictation hole that would usually be filled by orders from command, but on top of the wind seemed trustworthy. It was like if I followed it, I would always be headed in the right direction, as if it was the way nature intended. It was a strange feeling for sure, and it was even more strange when I bumped into my first real obstacle, a massive rock face that ascended upwards a mountain. I had walked for I don't know how long, following wind and nature's will only for me to bump into a massive fuck off rock wall. Off a great start. Off to a great start for sure. Oh, how convenient. A mountain. Thanks, nature. I say out loud in a genuinely surprised yet annoyed manner. I can definitely say I wasn't expecting this. Then again, there really wasn't anything for me to expect. I mean, I don't have a map of this place, so really I can't say it's out of place, even though it looked out of place. Hell, I couldn't even see it from where I was back at the train station. How far did I walk? Or was this huge ass mountain just hiding from view or something? I took a few steps forward and investigated the massive rock formation. I let my rifle fall into its sling. As I felt along the face with my hands, I tapped it a few times to see how dense it was, just to see if it was fake or anything like that. But nope, as far as I was concerned, this mountain was real. It just seemed out of place is all, as if it was just dropped here from the heavens or someone built it to look this way. There must have been some serious tectonic shenanigans for something like this to have formed. Evidently the wind still blew, and I hadn't found any answers yet. Therefore I continued on. But where exactly was I supposed to go now? I took a few steps back from the mountain and looked from side to side. This wall of rock seemed to go on for quite a long time, as I could see a way around it from where I was. So the next best option besides going back was to walk next to the mountain so I could locate a path forwards. I came to terms with my new path forward rather quickly and chose to go left, and in doing so I must have alerted something to my presence. For as I began to head left, beside the mountain wall was a bush to my right, beside the path I had been taking to this point. Rustled something fierce. Something or someone was in that shrubbery. I grabbed my rifle and swung it around, ready to engage whatever was waiting for me in that bush, only for a pair of rabbits, a white and a black one, to pop out and stare up at me. Admittedly, I recoiled back slightly as they appeared, but upon seeing what they were, I lowered my rifle slightly to look at them over more properly without the assistance of my gun sights. They were indeed a pair of white and black rabbits. They were the first physical confirmed sentient life I had actually seen here. That wasn't the trees or the grass, needless to say. I was extremely surprised to see something I was actually familiar with on this alien world. I would have preferred someone I could have talked to, but at least they weren't head crabs. The two creatures perked up onto their hind legs and looked at me, their heads banking from side to side as their noses and whiskers wiggled intensely. I slowly, as not to startle them, knelt down a bit to look at them better. Much how they rose up higher to look at me better. As they did, the two rabbits knelt back down onto their forepaws and bounced off. But it was strange. It seemed as if they shared a moment to look at each other before they turned tail and headed away, as if they were confirming something that they had seen. And how they scurried off was strange too. They bounced away, they moved in perfect symmetry. I watched them as they went their existence now, even more particularly to me than before, as their existence alone was strange enough. I watched as they entered a large hole like a cave on the side of the mountain wall. It looked big enough for anyone to enter, that anyone being me, of course. As they bounced out of sight, I quickly gave chase, and I would end up at the cave. They disappeared into it. I looked over the entrance carefully, wondering how something like this would have formed naturally. I wasn't an expert on rocks or whatever, but something like this didn't seem right. I just couldn't put my finger on it. I then noticed a rather large rock off to the side of the cave, leaning against the mountainside. It looked just big enough to cover this hole, as if it had been covering it at some point, but someone or something moved it out of the way to gain access to the cave. Obviously, it wasn't the rabbits that did that. As I stood there at the entrance of the cave, I pondered for a moment. This all seemed a little too convenient to me. It was like I was supposed to be headed this way, like I was supposed to discover this cave by following the rabbits. This all seemed a bit too laid out, either by someone hidden in the bushes or by some otherworldly cosmic force who was coercing me into this place. In fact, if it weren't for the rabbits, I probably wouldn't have found this cave to begin with. I more than likely would have just walked past it, as there was a great deal of bush and plant life obscuring it from view. But nevertheless, the rabbits piqued my interest, and I wanted to see what they were about. It's not every day you see something like them. Plus, on top of that, the wind was pulling me into the cave. I could feel the tugging of the breeze. It whooshed past me. I nodded and accepted the fact that this path was more likely the path towards progress, even though I knew I was beginning railroaded into doing this. I mean, I could have turned back and kept walking around the base of the mountain, but then I probably would have got tired or lost and end up coming back this way anyway. I reached up with my left hand and grabbed my night vision goggles. I swung them down into place over my mask and flicked them on. The surfaces of the cave would instantly be revealed to me, the floor of the cave seeming the least jagged compared to the walls and ceiling, which had rocks jutting out all over the place. Nevertheless, it was still rather bumpy to walk upon, especially to someone like myself, who would now need to squeeze into this claustrophobic space with all his kit and general size in mind. My shoulders and rucksack were going to be the biggest pain of this rather unpleasant experience. I was going to slip in here. I would have to do it by twisting my body sideways, shimmying along the walls. The space allotted for width clearance just too small to walk face front into. If I were a smaller man, I would have been able to, but alas, I was not. For once, my shoulders have failed me. And so, I began my trek into the cave, right side first. This cave was really a tight fit. As I pushed myself further into, the prospect of me becoming stuck in here became rather prevalent as the walls squeezed in around me. Hell, if anything here attacked me from the rear, I would be screwed. But if anything came at me from the front, I would have at least a weapon to deal with them. My rifle was useless to me here. It was too big, and firing it with one hand wouldn't work out well. My Magnum, on the other hand, had much greater combat effectiveness. Before I got deep, I dropped the rifle on its sling and drew my sidearm. I hoped I wouldn't have to use it. Step by step, I went further, each step walking me further and further away from the light of day and into darkness of the mountain. I thanked God for my night vision. Its illumination of the cave was greatly underappreciated. Also, because I knew if I didn't have them, I'd need to rely on my flashlight, which I didn't have the same confidence in as I did with my NVGs. But this, let's just hope I reached the other side before batteries needed to recharge. Actually, let's hope I reach the other side, period. I have no idea if this cave system would plop me out on the other side of the mountain. It may just dump me into a cave or some shit. But then again, I couldn't recall at the time any kind of rabbit that lived in a cave, which meant there was an exit somewhere in here. Let's just hope I'm headed the right way. Foot after foot I went deeper. I could feel the rocks scraping and bumping into my helmet and armor, no doubt dirtying them up and possibly ripping the fabric of the camouflage casing. What I really worried about was massive cave spiders dropping down into spaces between my vest and my neck and scurrying about. I hated spiders. I hated them with a passion. And the more I thought about it, the more it creeped me out. And times it felt like shit was crawling on me, and I would need to stop and punch that area, whatever means necessary, either with my hand or by slamming my body into the closest rock wall. God, I hate spiders, and I hate being in this cave just as much. Then I saw light. It was about the size of a pin tip, but it was light, and it was ahead of me. I sighed deeply as if I thanked the Lord I was headed the right way, and now was just a matter of time before I got to my goal. This time between here and getting out of the cave, I wanted to be as short as possible, so I picked up the pace. My boots moved quicker, one after the other, as I shimmied along faster while the walls continued scraping me up good. I knew I would need to clean my armor when I got out of here, something that I had actually looked forward to doing. Cleaning my armor would give me an excuse to take it off in the first place, which would then give me time to relax outside of this shell. I could already feel the release when I was sent to receive. The light grew larger as I grew closer to the end. By the time I no longer needed my night vision, I was only a few feet from the exit. I could smell the change in atmosphere as the wind once again picked up. I'm not sure how the wind was being tunneled through here, but it was definitely welcome, especially if it blew off any cobwebs or bugs riding on my shoulders. Soon I could feel the light of the sun on my skin again. It felt rewarding. I had made it through the cave and I didn't even break a sweat. Well, actually I did, but that was only because I was getting stressed the hell out. I never considered myself to be someone who was claustrophobic, but that place was testing my limits beyond belief. Finally, my right boot left the shade of the cave and entered the light. The moment it did, I practically threw myself from the constricting confines of the rock walls. I stumbled forth from the hole, falling to my knees as I shuddered. God, fuck, that place sucked, I said to myself as I gently shook my head as I dusted off my shoulders before tending to the rest of my clothing and armor. My fingers and palms threw most of the surface grime away, but I knew I needed more time to get my armor looking good as new, or at least something close to that. Standing up, I looked around, holstering my magnum and re-equipping my rifle. This place gave off a very different aura compared to the savannah, but saying it was different didn't do it justice. This new area felt welcoming compared to before, like the land itself was eager to meet me. First of all, the climate had changed. It was way colder here, not too cold to warrant a jacket or a sweater, a bit chillier than what I was expecting, for instance. While the savannah felt like midsummer, this place felt something more akin to early spring. It was cool, yet the sun still blazed above. Maybe it was the mountains, which I noted right away, towering around me, as if I found myself in a valley of some sorts. The peaks of the Herculean mountains rose high into the air, almost if not barely scraping the clouds that moved past them. I felt like an ant in here. The peaks looked like the jagged, brown teeth of a long-dead behemoth monster that could have created valleys by just walking upon the land. They looked awe-inspiring. Beneath the perilous peaks of the tall mountain tops were trees, but not just any trees. These were different from the savanna trees, in fact. They were a completely different species. They were bonsai trees, massively tightly packed bonsai trees. Their snaking, winding bodies looked like moss growing on rocks. All the way at the top of the mountains, they looked they reached upwards towards the tallest peaks of the mountain range, finding the smallest bits of flat rock to grow into. But as the forest got thicker towards the bottom, and they descended down closer to the ground, their size grew. I looked at the nearest one to me. Its leaves were a vibrant green, its body and trunk were a proud brown, and its base at the roots spread far and wide across the rich soil. It looked big enough to live in, and it was much taller than me. It was a magnificent change in flora. I couldn't have expected but welcoming with open arms. Hell, this new valley air that I breathed felt cleaner and fresher, as if this place was being preserved in time by someone, like a massive, invisible glass dome was placed on top of the valley, keeping all the life energy inside. I felt good here, unlike the savannah, which felt dead to me, and possibly dead to everything else that lived there, if anything lived there at all. I then, after admiring the trees, noticed a path forwards. This path, unlike the ones I had been taking before, now seemed even more treaded upon, as if they were used regularly and recently. This confirmed my suspicion that I was indeed not alone in this world. I was almost certain that whatever made this path was sentient, which gave me hope of finding help, so I decided to follow it, but slowly. I didn't want to run into anything that was hostile head on. It could encircle me and then outnumber me before taking me down. This was my biggest fear. And so off I went now, slightly crouched but closer to the ground as I lessened my body's profile and quiet my footfalls. Luckily, beside the trees, the ground here was vibrant with plant life. That worked well with the woodland camouflage I had on me, better concealing my presence. Shame it was only on my vest and helmet. My BDUs were patterned in urban camo, but this was better than nothing. What was the purpose of the woodland camo on back at Black Mesa? I mean, the urban camo made sense, but the woodland camo? I didn't understand it. Maybe it made sense to some general somewhere, who knows. My head shifted from right to left as I scanned the area with care. I observed everything, but admired nothing. My time to give praise on the land had come to an end for now. I needed to focus on the task at hand, and while being here felt amazing, I needed to stay vigilant. And with my vigilance in full force, I found something huge. As I passed a rather large bonsai tree, I found that the path made a quick turn to the left and slightly descended. I looked where the path headed, and my eyes locked with a massive village. I quickly stopped in my tracks and carefully ducked into the nearest bush. I then put down my rifle and reached back into my rucksack. I rummaged around for a brief moment before I swung around. What grabbed into both of my hands, it was a pair of binoculars, and I was going to need them as now came a scouting phase. With my gas mask still on, I pulled the binoculars up to my lenses and peered out of the bush and off into the distance to see what I could see. And what I saw was surprised me greatly. The village was entirely made out of the trees that grew there. And what I meant by that is that the people that lived here did indeed hollow the trees and make them their homes inside of them. Absolutely phenomenal. I didn't think anyone has ever done that before, at least not back on Earth. And if people back home had done that before, then I probably would be just as surprised. There were even small suspended bridges at the top of the trees for whoever those people were to cross safely from home to home. Of course, trees had been removed to make way for paths, which there were a lot of them. And there were also a great deal of footbridges that were built over small rivers that wove in and out of the village center. And in the village center, which was surrounded by a river on all sides, practically making it a small island, was a market. This market caught the most of my attention, however, not because of the food present, or the stalls that sold the food, but the fact that the whole place seemed abandoned. There was nobody there despite all the stands being filled to the brim with brightly colored fruits and vegetables. Actually, the place wasn't just abandoned, it was abandoned in a hurry. I could see baskets lying about on the ground with spilled produce all over the place. And as the wind blew again, the air gently howled, emphasizing the emptiness. But noticing that, I looked around. The rest of the village seemed empty too. Everything looked dead, yet I couldn't find the bodies. Yeah, no, something's wrong here, I whispered out loudly to myself. As I lowered the binoculars, it was quite possible that I was seeing something, but I was 100% sure something was amiss. Maybe all of the inhabitants were congregating somewhere for some reason, and I just happened to catch them at a bad time. Who knows, but something is certain here. I was looking at the picture from the whole wrong angle. And so, I turned back around to put my binoculars away. It was at this moment which I realized where all of the inhabitants were congregated. They were behind me. All of them were behind me. I was now surrounded by dozens upon dozens of 5-foot tall, multicolored, big ruffled maned ponies, with warped unicorn horns, of which were all staring at me with big puppy dog eyes. As their heads banked back and forth from side to side, as they silently stared at me, it was a literal ocean of moving colors before me, and I was outnumbered and surrounded on all sides. The exact thing I didn't want to happen. And while something like this didn't seem possible, given the amount of noise these creatures would have made in performing this maneuver, I didn't care. I let my guard down for less than 5 minutes and got what was coming to me. And just to add insult to injury, out from the front of the group came those 2 rabbits that popped themselves up and stood and stared at me again, just like the rest of these creatures. Well, fuck. Well, that was the end of that chapter, and I thought it was pretty good. Although I felt like it was a little bit dragged on, but yeah, it was still really good. A few comedic moments here and there. Not the funniest to me, but it works. But that's kind of the whole point of storytelling. Well. Yeah. Staying up late. Oh, it's great doing this. It's fun. It sometimes actually is. Kind of like this. I read through the entire story before... No. Let me rephrase that. I read through the entire chapter this time. So there was a lot less, fuck ups and all that. But, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of all I got to say. Well, stay golden, and good afternoon or good night.